First of all, could I ask everyone to mute, please? Alistair? Thank you. Okay, good morning. My name is Hermione Parsons, Industry Professor and Director of Deakin University's Centre for Supply Chain and Logistics. As we gather for this meeting, let us take a moment to recognise the traditional lands on which we do our business today, acknowledging the elders past, present and emerging of all the land we work and live on with gratitude and respect. I'm delighted to welcome you to the launch of the Australian Guide to Implementing Food Traceability, an important milestone in the work of the Centre for Supply Chain Logistics is undertaking in food traceability. Food traceability matters to our agri-food sector. It matters because it's what consumers demand. It matters because it represents a significant growth opportunity to expand our agri-food sector. And it matters because, in a very real sense, it represents the future of the industry. Collaborative, digital, automated, personalised, sustainable, and most importantly, transparent supply chains. The COVID-19 pandemic has accelerated a number of trends that were already on the horizon. A growing demand for health and well-being products that are ethically and sustainably sourced, an increase in dine-in ready meals, and an increase in the take-up of online orders. Changing consumer demand has brought new growth opportunities. A recent CSIRO report found that the growing interest in healthy and sustainable lifestyles could be worth $25 billion and make up around 10% of the value of Australia's food and agribusiness sector by 2030. In our globally connected world, consumers are more informed, more connected, and more demanding about food provenance and product claims, and trust in our food supply chains has become integral to consumer decision-making. But technology also enables greater surveillance capability, uncovering more food safety threats, and with the potential to undermine trust at the same time, mobile devices have accelerated the power of consumers and increased their demand for verifiable information. And remember that while consumers have always been able to vote with their wallets, they now influence not only what they buy, but what others buy too. We are already being pressed to supply chain level traceability by regulators in our international markets. In 2018, Russia launched Chesny Znaktom, its first nationwide digital track and trace system. In July 2020, the United States Food and Drug Administration released its new era of smarter food safety with a stated aim of achieving a more digital, traceable, safer food system. And in 1921, China implemented mandatory traceability requirements for all food products transported via cold chain, including dairy products, fruits, and drinks. Companies are under pressure from governments, consumers, NGOs, and other stakeholders to divulge more information about their supply chains, and the reputational cost of failing to meet these demands can be very high. Food traceability is the future. The use of technology such as blockchain and the Internet of Things gives food products a voice, enabling real-time monitoring and covering for human failure in compliance. At the turn of the 20th century, we saw the industrialization of food production. In the 1980s, we saw the rise of supermarkets and greater consumer choice. And in the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic, we are watching the rise of the endless shelf, where bricks and mortar businesses and e-commerce merge, and the line between online and offline blurs, as customers themselves check the availability of items in stock, but not on the shelves. The Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations estimates that the global food traceability industry will reach over 26 billion by 2025, driven by a concern for clean, safe, sustainable, and ethically sourced food. This afternoon, you'll hear some key players in Australia's agribusiness sector, an opportunity to look at the issue from the perspective of government, retail, grower, processor, food manufacturer, and distributor. Each of our panelists this morning, not this afternoon, will speak for around 5 minutes, and you'll have the opportunity to ask questions using the question and answer button at the bottom of your screen. It's my absolute pleasure to now introduce Tony Boll. Mr. Tony Boll is chair of the Food Traceability Laboratory. Tony is a member of the Centre for Supply Chain Logistics Industry Advisory Board and has recently taken on the role of chairperson of the Centre's Food Traceability Laboratory. Tony's previous roles include CEO, South Pacific DHL Global Forwarding, and former board member of Asia Pacific Management DHL Global Forwarding. Tony is a veteran of the logistics industry and has also held directorships in industry associations and has been invited to participate in many government-sponsored logistics initiatives. I now hand the computer, literally, and the microphone to Tony Boll.
Thank you, Hermione, and good morning, everyone. The Food Traceability Lab first met in 2018 to advise Deakin Centre for Supply Chain and Logistics on priorities related to a research agenda. From a number of research themes, the need to support industry in how to implement supply chain level traceability was deemed the highest priority. At the time, there were technologies and data capture systems such as blockchain, Internet of Things sensors, the rollout of 5G network, and the growing application of machine learning and artificial intelligence. We wanted to see how they could be used effectively to track food products along supply chains. We also know that the majority of food businesses are small and medium-sized enterprises with little spare time and money to be investing in this capability. For food supply, the one back, one forward traceability mandate has resulted in a fragmented and time-consuming process for food recall. It's now changing, and we need a view of the flow of the product. We determined to focus on how we could verify the product's journey and send the proof along the supply chain to the consumer, who in turn could find out about this journey. This is key, as Australia's farmers and food suppliers are global champions at producing high quality products. We looked around the world at food traceability systems and regulations and found that the Global Food Traceability Center had developed a methodology based on critical tracking events and key data elements, somewhat like the HACCP methodology Australian food businesses knew. We decided to adopt this method to work out what was important to track and what was mandated by regulators in a product's journey from the farm to the consumer, here in Australia and in our export markets. The solution had to fit our criteria: interoperable between IT systems, that meant standardizing the data; globally recognizable, seeing as we export around 70% of what we produce; technology agnostic, it should work regardless of what applications are used; and affordable and scalable. Today, we are launching our first guide, the Australian Gift to Implementing Food Traceability, AGIFT. It is designed with two audiences in mind: businesses in food supply chains and solution providers who help them manage data. There are 12 modules covering the origin and destination of food and how to safely share data. You can start at any module that is priority for your business, staging your implementation at a pace that you can choose. We will soon be delivering a red meat and livestock traceability guide, and others will follow where there is need. This year, we commenced the industry demonstrations on how to use the guide with various technologies and platforms. Our solution provider reference group is standing by to support these demonstrations. As part of the program, we're also developing e-learning modules to help businesses get across implementing food traceability. The program extends into rollout across Australian agri-food businesses, peak bodies, and education providers. Developing this guide has been a challenge, and I would like to thank the team of researchers at Deakin. GS1 Australia, supply chain standards body, the module reviewers, solution provider reference group, our food traceability lab partners, and our sponsors for making this possible. We all share a mission to lift brand Australia and benefit food consumers. And we hope you take up the guide and join the Implementing Food Traceability program. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tony. I'd now like to introduce Ram Akella. Ram Akella is Head of Business Solutions, Our Brand, Convenience and Product Traceability at the Woolworths Group, and is also co-chair of the National Traceability Advisory Group at GS1 Australia. Ram believes it is vital that organisational activities are tracked and monitored regularly, and progress and value are demonstrated over a period of time. Ram will discuss the traceability issues from the perspective of retail. Over to you, Ram.
Thanks, Hermione, and good morning, everyone, wherever you are. Good day, maybe is more appropriate. Wow, amazing journey. I just can't believe it. So I still recollect sitting in this very same room, I guess it was 18 months ago, discussing on how do we actually solve the challenges with respect to a number of issues we discuss pretty much on a day-to-day basis. Obviously, traceability is a means to actually accomplish that. So 18 months ago, we actually prioritized developing this traceability guide as the foundational necessary first step on progressing with traceability. And here we are. I'm super excited actually to understand and how do we unlock the capabilities that this guide will offer to all of us. Before I do that, I'd like to have a quick refresh of our memories about what is traceability all about. Not we don't know. That's what we're here, but it's always good to refresh a little bit and then see where the value, the real value of traceability lies, and how this guide will actually help get there. I'm probably needing some help on slide shares. Thank you. So before I delve into the industry challenges and where the opportunities and the value lies, I guess it is at a point where we are to actually come and agree that we now have a shared language in progressing with product traceability, and this guide actually enables that. Next slide, please. Thank you. We at Woolworths Group, this is our purpose. We are here to actually working together with a number of industries, suppliers, farmers, all entities to create a better tomorrow. And this guide is a classic example in accomplishing that. Unlock the real value that sits within that. Next slide, please. Thank you. And I'm pretty sure, I can't even recollect how many times I have presented this slide, and you may have seen it and got bored with this slide, but it actually keeps coming to my mind how relevant it is to actually refresh our memories. Why now? Why now? I think that is super important for all of us to focus on as we talk about all these issues, and the issues come every second day, but it is actually not one issue. That's important. That's why this slide actually so resonates with me when I communicate with a lot of audience. It's not one issue we're tackling. We're actually here working towards solving a number of things, and product traceability and full end-to-end product traceability provide that means to many ends and not just one in itself. So whether you're in the industry trying to solve the food safety issues, whether you're focusing on tackling with the food fraud and authenticity, whether you're in the biosecurity space, or whether you operate in the certification space, we have a number of them. So this traceability provides an opportunity. It brings a level of transparency that we all can actually relate to. And this guide, I believe, provides that shared language to be able to communicate across any audience, whether they are here in Australia or whether they're our global trade partners. Next slide, please. Thank you. And another slide, you might have seen it many times, but this is where the value is, and it is not in one place. You talk about whether we're talking about customer, we are really big in customer. What I strongly believe in, this guide actually will help retailers like us, the brands, the primary producer, whoever you are in the supply chain, to meet that increasing demand of customer expectations about the product. I'm pretty sure, and I know a few of them, especially primary producers, they invested very heavily in actually uplifting the quality of the product. So how do we actually verify and certify, and how this guide can actually help get there? So it's all up to us actually to figure it out and then take this forward. Next slide, please. Here is what I strongly believe in, and I think we keep talking about on an everyday basis. Traceability is actually not for one. There's value for it for everyone in the industry, wherever you are in the supply chain. And when I had a quick sneak peek of the guide, I found that a few of those I thought I would call out. So if you are into provenance and if you want to actually call out those, this guide will actually offer the basis for that. Food safety issues, obviously, waste reduction is one area. And how do we do that? I think it's important we actually call out those key product attributes. That sort of sums up with the quality attributes as well when you think about it. We talk about free range, gluten-free, organic. I think you know it all. So how do we actually bring that to life? How do we actually create that level of transparency and the message that customer really understands the product journey, how the product is handled in the supply chain? I think we have come a long way in this 18 months, and this guide is I believe is another starting point for us to all bind to that shared language of communication and progress and traceability. So before I close, I'd like to take the opportunity to actually thank and congratulate Deakin, Food Traceability Lab, and the project team in actually bringing this together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ram, and your involvement has been fabulous in this project. Thank you. I would now like to introduce Malcolm Letts. Malcolm is Deputy Director General and Chief of Biosecurity Officer at the Queensland Department of Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry. He is a strategic thinker and understands policy and planning from both government and industry perspectives. Malcolm will discuss the traceability issues from the perspective of government. Over to you, Malcolm.
Thanks, Hermione, and good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I'd just like to be clear that I'm providing a perspective from Malcolm Letts, who is a public servant who is involved in a range of different traceability working groups and projects and has a real passion about the importance of traceability going forward. I'm not providing a jurisdictional whole of Australian government perspective on traceability. I'm just going to share my screen. That's working, is it?
Yes, it is. It needs to go on large screen, though.
Is it up now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so as I say, I've been involved in a range of different working groups for probably 4 years now. This is a topic that's very dear to the heart of government, and I guess I come from a biosecurity perspective primarily because that's my role. But we know that, if I can just click to the next slide. We know why traceability is important to governance because it protects industry and consumers both. It has multiple benefits, I think, as Ram alluded to, in terms of food safety, biosecurity, market access, and protection of provenance and brand. Any of you who are involved in the strawberry industry or the melon industry will know that it's very rapid from one day to the next in relation to loss of reputation and loss of market access to do with anything associated with food safety. And those of you who were around in the late 80s will remember Australia lost access to the US market for beef because of organochlorines. So there's a whole range of reasons. That's a $2 billion market, by the way. There's a whole range of reasons why this is important. COVID has demonstrated to us all that there are clear benefits associated with traceability for humans, and the same applies in the area of biosecurity. Ability to act fast in a biosecurity outbreak is absolutely critical. We have alternative technologies around diagnostic tests and other things that will enable us to do a diagnosis, but it's the speed of the response that traceability systems really provide. We have a national livestock identification system, which is run by the Integrity Systems Company, and it has already demonstrated that, as well as the benefits I've just talked about, there is a range of other benefits that you can draw from a traceability system. For example, stock theft is something that the NLIS really helps with. And in addition, there was a road prioritisation piece of work that was done for the federal government funding of roads based on livestock movement data. So there's a range of things that can arise from a traceability system that are unforeseen at this point in time. One of the challenges that we have around traceability is the diversity of supply chains and the outcomes. I've already talked about the outcomes, the multiple benefits, and each agency responsible for those outcomes will probably have a different set of criteria and a different standard that it requires for assurance. Food safety is obviously a much higher standard of assurance than, let's say, brand protection. The other complexity relates to the fact that we've got a huge diversity of product ranges. We've got from melons to mangoes to pigs, and all of the things in between. And each of those has a very different route to market. And so having a traceability system that is able to actually meet all of those needs is a huge challenge. So as I said, the livestock industry is pretty well catered for. The real emphasis at the moment, I think, is around the plant industries for us, and they are much more diverse and complex in the nature of supply chains and the nature of the products. So governance is actually the biggest issue that we have around traceability systems, and it really comes down to data sharing. We've got multiple systems out there already. I'm aware, for example, in the markets in Brisbane, that there are individual companies that have developed their own apps that they use with their suppliers and their customers. So really, there's a whole range of questions around what a common coding system looks like, what do we need to achieve, and are there already some solutions that exist? Can existing systems be adapted to some sort of common coding system? And how would data be shared, and who would be the data custodians? In the event of a biosecurity outbreak or a food safety outbreak, we need to be able to get access to data so that we can trace back very quickly. And then that raises the question around whether we are looking at a voluntary system or a mandated system. If industry is the owner of the system, it's a huge advantage to government in relation to getting acceptance of the adoption of that system. However, access to the data is also critically important in something like a biosecurity outbreak. And there's a question in terms of what element of the data, what fields need to be shared in that sort of instance. It's not everything. There will be some critical fields, and how do we get access to those fields, and how do we get agreement on that? My view is that the solution could well be driven by commercial processes. We know, as we've heard from RAM, that the retailers are very keen on traceability systems that serves their needs across a whole range of outcomes. And I have a view that we've come to a point with technology and a range of other things that means that there probably is a commercial system out there. There's a bit of a problem with government. We're very reluctant to pick a winner. Historically, we've shied away from adopting one pre-existing solution. We're seen by the public to be needed to be fair and equitable in relation to the way that we choose outcomes or solutions. But I have to say that if industry is there on side, bought into the process, it makes a huge difference. And NLIS, I guess, is the classic example of how that works. So that's the core of my presentation. I'm just going to make a couple of comments on the guide, if I could. And as I said, if it's adopted by industry, then that's hugely beneficial to government in relation to being able to get acceptance across the board. From a biosecurity and food safety point of view, reliability and accuracy of information is critical, as we've learned from COVID. And then there is the question of voluntary versus mandated. There's also a question, I think, in relation to, sorry, just go to my, there's also a question in relation to how we onboard new technologies as they arise. So the NLAS systems based on an RFID tag, we know that there are some big companies in America, for example, that are doing things like digital face recognition for livestock. How do we onboard that if it comes along in the future? So the guide, one of the real strengths of the guide from my point of view is that it's generic. It will work across all food chains, which is fantastic. It seems to be able to work on a range of different scales of business, which is also a real positive. And it's technology agnostic, which I think is fantastic. Interoperability is a key, and the guide seems to also pick that up. So all in all, I guess from the point of view of addressing some of the issues that I raised in my presentation, I think the guide takes a huge step forward. Thanks very much, Hermione.
Thank you very much, Malcolm. It was great to have you expressing your views there as well. We're very grateful to that. Thank you very much. Malcolm, can I get you to stop sharing? Or okay, great. We're right. We're on to the next part of it. Thank you, Malcolm. I'd like to now introduce Tanya Chapman. So it's my very great pleasure to introduce Tanya. Tanya is the General Manager Operations Sunraysia at Neutrano Produce Group, and is driven by a passion for rural women to stand up to the challenges and become leaders in their communities and their industries. Tanya will discuss the traceability issues from the perspective of the grower and processor. Over to you, Tanya.
Thanks, Hermione. I'll just get my presentation up and hopefully share my screen. Can you just let me know if it comes up?
Not quite, but it might be on its way.
No?
Not yet, no.
All right, let me just have another go.
Okay.
That'd be right, worked perfectly before.
It's the way things work. We can get Joe to show it if you like, and you can speak and just say next slide, and he'll do that if you like.
Yep, that will be fine, assuming it really does not want to play.
All right, so Joe's putting it up onto the screen now. And just say when next slide, and he'll follow your lead.
No problem. So my presentation, a little different to the others in that I don't focus on the technical. I will focus on our company and why we value traceability and why I think it's so important. So in horticulture, the supply chain is often very long and complicated, with growers, packers, multiple transport and logistics, marketers, importers, retailers, and finally consumers, all needing to have a clear and transparent view over that whole chain, and all that transpires is challenging, to say the least. Many times the question has been asked, and continues to be asked, why is it important to know the full history and the traceability of all of our products? Next slide. To us at Neutrano Produce Group, it's simple. We want every consumer who eats our produce to feel safe, knowing that we have taken every care possible to ensure that not only does the fruit look and taste amazing, just as it does here in this picture, but it's safe for their whole family to consume. How do we guarantee that if we do not have an oversight over all of the processes along the way? Next slide. The process that starts on our farms with what we do to our trees, right from plantings. These trees were planted 2 days ago, in fact. So it's right from planting right through every year to grow that crop. The process needs to be transparent so that consumers have faith in the safety of our product. They are trusting us to make sure that this product is not only safe, but it comes from where we say it does. They deserve that right. After all, they are taking this produce into their own homes. We only buy our trees from reputable nurseries who only source their budwood from accredited industry budwood scheme, or we grow them ourselves on site. Next slide. Harvest time can be very hectic for us. At times we may be picking up to 1,000 bins a day off multiple sites on our own farms, let alone the third-party fruit that comes into our shed. So to ensure that we have that full visibility over the process and the fruit, every bin is scanned and matched to the block it came from, the person who picked it, and what time they picked it, so that if there are any issues in that fruit when it comes into the shed, we can easily trace that back. Next slide, please. As bins are tipped into the packing line, we can trace how those bins are packed out. Are they packed into crates for a retailer or a carton destined for Amsterdam? Some will be a collection of outputs depending on the size, grade, and quality. Next slide. Our traceability system allows us to track the fruit in bin numbers and then the fruit out in pallet numbers. Every carton or tray or bin that leaves our shed has a label on it, and that label identifies where the fruit came from, how it's been treated in our packing shed. And those labels will vary from country to country and indeed customer to customer, depending on the information they also require. And this year, we're now doing different coloured labels for different local retailers. Next slide. For every export shipment that leaves our shed, we keep a sample on site, stored at the same conditions as the outgoing produce would be enduring on its journey. This allows us to monitor how the fruit is travelling, making sure that we treated it correctly so that it is still in optimum condition when it reaches our valued customer and ultimately that valued consumer. Next slide. There are so many sellers in the marketplace, so many brands for consumers to choose from. To achieve sustainability and thus longevity in the market, you have to have a brand that the consumer can have faith in and look to buy every time they shop. So the produce not only has to look and taste the part, the brand has to stack up, but also be protected. And to us at Nutrano, it's not only our Nutrano brand that we strive to protect and must protect, it is brand Australia. Australian farmers rely heavily on our export markets, and without these crucial markets, many of our farmers would not still be on the land. And whilst that would be devastating for those farmers, their families, and rural communities, it's also a bad outcome for consumers. Less competition means less choice and thus can drive higher prices. It is for these reasons that we are Global Gap accredited, HACCP, SQF, HARPS and SEDEX. They're all very important to our company. That brand protection can also come under pressure from those people trying to gain leverage off those brands. Counterfeiting has become a popular way of demanding premium prices for lesser grade fruit in our export markets. Next slide. The thing about farmers is they know what they know. They know how to grow great produce. They don't like to get caught up in things that take them away from doing what it is they love, growing food to feed the world. To me, that's where I see the true value in the GIFT, a very easy to follow guide that doesn't take them away from their true passion and what they know how to do. The guide standardises the information each of us needs to not just be compliant with traceability, but to make it work for our own business. Being generic, it fits so much of our homegrown produce. Let's never forget that Australia grew up on the backbone of family farms. This hasn't changed. Yes, we have seen a greater emergence of corporate farming enterprises, but this gift or guide, I see it more as a gift because it doesn't matter what size your operation is, you can make it work for you. In these ever-changing times, this is so crucial. Technology changes almost daily. So what good is a guide if it can't be utilised with this new and emerging technologies? To me, one of the key parts of the guide is that's in the form of modules. Farmers do not want to have to go and spend a week, 2 weeks in there learning how to do anything at all because they don't want to be taken away from their business. But with this guide, they can work through it, they can figure out their own priorities and do it in their own time space. Gone are the days when we could just say we've done the right thing. There are so many regulatory requirements to keep up with. What records are required? What are the Australian standards, the international standards? And by working through these modules, you get to understand all that. To me, the hard yards have been done for us. Next slide. I know each of you will be aware every time you log onto a device, you run the risk of being hacked. Cybersecurity is something that very few of us totally understand the depth of. But what we do know is digital technologies are being increasingly adopted in modern supply chains. This brings many benefits, such as the ease of data sharing amongst our trading partners, access to that product-related data when we need it, and end-to-end traceability. It also helps end users to have product-specific data and to make more informed decisions when purchasing. However, the interconnection of trade partners using this digital technology brings cyber threats really to the spotlight, with the potential to leak the business data, disrupt business operations, and provoke losses. Not every farmer or logistics company, or indeed many of our SMEs, have an IT team or specialist on call or on the payroll to work through these threats and understand how to mitigate them. The guide can help us with each of the layers and the common threats in those layers. Unless we understand and acknowledge the threats, we cannot devise a way to protect ourselves. Next slide. Whilst Australia is a small part of global food production, it is a very important part, especially to the Australian economy, who relies heavily on the export of Australian products, and to the Australian population, who expect to be able to purchase safe food to feed their families. But it's also important to the global population, who have come to trust our brands, trust that we are sending them safe, healthy food. In order to retain this reputation and this trust, we must all work together to protect that brand, to be able to demonstrate end-to-end traceability of what we grow, what we pack, and what we expect to feed their families. And I believe that this gift is going to assist Australian farmers in continuing to supply food, both locally and globally, and to protect the brands that they have worked so hard to build. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tanya. Thank you very much indeed. It was great to get your perspective. And of course, we love the emphasis on the term gift, the gift to Australia. And I think that is just fabulous to get your considered opinion. Thank you very much. I'd now like to introduce Alistair McFarlane. Alistair is the General Manager, Asset Development at Beston Global Food Company Limited, and is responsible for supporting origination of selected assets and businesses for incorporation into the Beston Global Food Company. As Acting Director of Beston Technology subsidiary, Alistair coordinates the expansion of the technology platform to include more sophisticated anti-counterfeit traceability and authenticity solutions for a broader international market. Alistair will discuss the traceability issues from the perspective of processor, food manufacturer, and supplier. Over to you, Alistair. And I believe we are doing Alistair's slides. Yes, we'll do the slides for you. So just tell Joe when you need to go to the next slide. Okay, Alistair?
Okay, thank you very much, Hermione.
Thank you.
Should I say congratulations, Hermione, and the GS1 Australia and project team for the publication of a fantastic guide. Some of the comments which Tanya has just mentioned echo very strongly within the dairy industry and in particular within Beston's group as well. I found it a clear, systematic and modularized and crisp document, all 233 pages of it, which I'm sure is going to set a new standard and carry a lot of weight with industry. In the time allotted, I will talk about the business and about the 4 themes which have been posed to the forum earlier in the context of capturing the critical tracking events, the CTEs, and the data elements which support them. Can I have the cover slide, please? So who are we? Beston Global Food Company. We're an ASX listed company, branded, employing 270 people, gross turnover of about 110 million. We're located in South Australia and Victoria, and our focus is on producing high quality, safe, clean dairy and meat protein foods for consumers. We operate in a low margin, high volume, regulated environment, which by its very nature means that traceability sits square and central to a requirement that we have. Central to our growth, we have a need for food safety and integrity within our ingredients, but within a secure supply chain. Next slide, please. Essentially, our value-added dairy business process involves inputs. Our inputs include about 25% of South Australia's milk, and we're entrusted with that milk from our 45 contracted dairy farmers who are paid on milk volume and quality per farm. Our outputs are mozzarella, hard cheeses, lactoferrin, whey powder, cream cheese and butter. Our buyers, as a consequence, are in the food service, retail, be it domestic, export, be it in ASEAN countries, China, Philippines and others. These are all under Beston's Edwards Crossing brand or incorporated within partner brands. What we're seeing going forward over the next 2 to 3 years is an emergence from servicing bulk food products, as we currently have, and into the emerging space of bioprotein nutraceuticals, which we believe will provide a higher value and higher margin for the company as a whole, and add into the benefits of value adding into the whole agribusiness scheme environment. To do that, we require visibility of our data to be efficient and to be trusted by others in this whole enterprise. Part of our solution is investment into intelligent traceability and authenticity systems. In this case, Osiris, which is a proprietary traceability system, which originated when we initially went into China back in 2015. Part of the call from our Chinese partners and importers was to have our quality of food attested to, both from a quality point of view and from an authenticity point of view. So we put in place our Osiris tracking system, coupled that with the brand lock authenticity system, and we've now incorporated an imperceptible digital watermarking system onto our packaging, all GS1 compliant, readable worldwide in all parts of the supply chain, as required and as afforded by our partners, importers and exporters. Next slide, please. What is the supply chain traceability challenge? Our aim is to contribute to the unlocking of value in the entire industry chain for mutual benefit. That is, for all parties within the dairy supply chain to be able to share in the uplift, which can come through the sharing of traceable, identifiable, and reliable information. We sit in the middle. We're the link guy. We respond to the buyer's responses, to consumers' wishes, and the way in which they sit within the global economic environment. But we also need to balance off and listen to and react to the farming community's requirements for payment certainty on terms which they can budget for. We, farmers, buyers, retailers, importers, we all have our data needs to balance off our own specific risk return requirements and make judgment calls. We can't make those judgment calls if we don't have the clarity required from information which we may not already have. My observation in the dairy supply chain is it's quite fragmented, and the knowledge is retained within various modes of the supply chain, but not necessarily transferred, shared, or made available in a meaningful way to other parties. We have out-of-date paper systems and missing gaps, and it's been accepted up until now. What we're seeing, I think, is in this modularized, transparent, easy to read, crisp, quite usable form, a guide form, is a capacity to incorporate the added requirements that we need to add to our existing systems and blend in others. CTE visibility is needed with our farmers. Our farmers respond to our milk contracts. The price paid, they want to hear about as early as possible. Stock, seed, feed, decisions need to be made, often 6 months to 2 years in advance. If we're talking about calving patterns and stock and supplementary feed acquisitions, it all needs to be planned for. We heard about biosecurity, a big issue on farms. Compliance Dairy Australia's Environmental, Social and Governance Sustainability Code is also very important. You would have witnessed the bit of hysteria last year in which dairy farming was cast as an evil villain, whereas in fact it is doing an incredible job in raising its profile in environmental, social and governance parameters. The health benefits of milk contrasted to the soy, pea, almond milk opportunities need to be defended, acknowledged and promoted. Traceability provides us with that way. We as processors are heavily reliant on quality and health assurances that we need to keep and maintain. HACCP and GMP, GQF, DASA, Dairy Safe, GMO, China CNCA, halal certifications, public liability insurance, it goes on and on. All of that information needs to be comprehensive, up to date and compliant. As shown on the slide, the captured CTEs and data will assist us on our focus on increasing sustainable returns per kilogram of milk solids. If we don't have that focus, we don't have the data, we can't concentrate on our focus and benefit from it. From the buyer's point of view, they're driven by margin, but they're also driven by velocity of product on shelf. That is, they need to be able to sell to a consumer what the consumer wants in a form in which they'll buy. That food needs to be essentially to be safe for consumption. It needs to have clear use-by dates. It needs to have transparency back to the source of the product and where it came from. Often the food can be, particularly overseas, 9/10th in line through sub-distribution networks. The origin of the product is often lost. Distribution agents are often asking, where does it come from? What is its quality? Where does it lie? Is it good? Is it bad? Traceability can provide that answer, and one which can be authentic and tracked and relied upon. Buyers also need to have clarity in logistics and even the shelf management of their products, and to stress appearance, inventory management, but above all, and most importantly, recall insurance. If the wrong product goes out at the wrong time and affects the general public, it needs to be recalled. That information needs to be identified with clarity and the product recalled to ensure no lives are lost or damages or reputations damaged. I'm quite heartened by Woolworth's discussion on the way in which they've concentrated on their data-centric model of bringing forward the requirements within their 1,000-store network. It's a challenge. It'll be a challenge to the rest of the dairy supply chain, but it's a challenge which is overdue, and it's one which needs to be recognised as timely. From within our own business, traceability and authenticity and being able to track data reliably through our complete supply chain, from farm through the factory to the retailers and beyond into the recycling environment, which we're now entering a new phase in, means that we need to build trust. We need to keep and promote our milk suppliers, who often do it hard, given drought, flood, all types of circumstances. But they are there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, plodding along. We need to recognise that and valorise what they're doing. We need to receive what we require, pay incentives to those who are producing it so that it can be sustained. We need to avoid financial losses due to non-compliant foods to buyers. We need to increase retail food service sales by being relevant to customers. We need to avoid recall of foods. We need to avoid wasted food. An amazing amount of food is just wasted in the supply chain, which hurts the complete supply chain itself and creates inefficiencies. We need to be in a position where we can self-regulate rather than being regulated by third parties. If we have the energy, the initiative, we can put these systems in place ourselves and not wait for others to have them enforced. Already, as we've seen, some of the traceability standards being raised by Europe and even in the US will be coming into our environment. And if we're not ready for it, there'll be a cost, a tariff, a cost which will need to be borne by the supply chain. We need to make circular economy contributions to ensure plastic recycling, for instance, can be recycled, particularly that which is food grade, to ensure that we meet the APCO covenant requirements. We need to make our own environmental, social, governance commitments to our suppliers, to Dairy Australia and to others. And importantly, as we take our journey forward into valorising the bioproteins in our nutraceuticals, we need to support the drive in that sector by ensuring that the smaller items which are in those SKUs, which are orally taken, need to be tracked individually right back to source and incorporate and provide assurance that the ingredients are safe for ingestion. So what can companies expect from the guide, this new guide, which I believe is a standout? With application, it will link critical tracking events and data, enabling traceability and circular economy outcomes. It'll provide a common language. It'll mean that we can talk to each other within the supply chain, and therefore we can plan well in advance. It'll provide authenticity. Confidence can be built. There'll be confidence to invest, and investing is the game changer. It may be not straight away, but it may be over the next 2 to 3, 4, 5 years. We'll have interoperability within our own businesses to ensure our own systems talk to each other so we can make more from less. We'll have market access to new markets, and particularly when it comes down to cross-border transfers and locations, it'll be swifter, more efficient. We won't have 20 tonnes of lobster sitting at airports melting in the sun. When it comes to cybersecurity, I was delighted to see that within the guideline, there was in one of the last modules, I believe, there's a very concise, well-structured explanation on cybersecurity and the way it can be mitigated. The STRIDE threat model was identified, and it seems quite appropriate that it can identify the threats within systems between the layers of information, and is quite suitable for analysing vulnerabilities and providing countermeasures, and importantly, protecting the privacy of data all supplied by the individual parties in the supply chain and shared. Within our own Osiris platform, we do have encrypted imperceptible digital watermarking, for instance, which does reduce diversion, counterfeiting, and we'll certainly be looking at upgrading our systems with this platform. The next step after that is looking at encrypted smart contracts and over time moving to blockchain. My final observation on cyber safe systems is that it is basically a risk insurance for business continuity. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Alistair. Thank you very much indeed. Can we now hand over to, I'll introduce Peter Carney. Mr. Peter Carney, Head of Innovation and Product Development at Toll Global Logistics. Peter has a strong interest in creating value through the application of ICT technologies to business solutions. And Peter's been a long time member of the... Can we get everyone to mute, please? Thank you. So Peter is a long-time member of the Food and Traceability Laboratory and has been a stalwart of all that we're doing. And Peter will discuss the traceability issues from the perspective of freight transport, storage and distribution. Over to you, please, Peter.
And I think it was myself unmuting eagerly by about 30 seconds that caused that.
That's okay.
So
that's
apologies.
Okay. It shows you're keen. I like it. Thank you.
Well, I am keen. Oh, there we go. So Hermione asked me to talk about these 4 questions. She also asked to talk about cybersecurity, but I'm not an expert in that area, so I'll leave that one alone. Toll, just a little bit on Toll. We've got about 6,000 vehicles in Australia, about 40,000 people around the world, and every day we drive to the moon and back in aggregate kilometres. So we're a reasonable force around the place. The agricultural industry is one of ours, but there are lots of other segments as well. All of them need traceability. In agriculture, I think we probably haul everything. I was speaking to one of our chaps from Tasmania, and it was salmon, it was meat, it was lettuce, it was cheese, it was chocolate. I don't think there was anything grown in Tasmania that we don't transport. So we're pretty interested in it. I'm not an expert in food particularly. I'm more closer to the healthcare industry, and a lot of the concepts in healthcare come over to food, I think. And in fact, traceability in healthcare, I think, led food in some respects, and for obvious reasons. I guess both products you're putting into your body, so we need to be careful about that. Every day, and increasingly, I'm involved in conversations to do with visibility and traceability, and it's quite remarkable. So I think that this topic is timely. So what is the supply chain traceability challenge? For me, what do we mean by traceability? And I define that as the ability to know about the journey that the product's been on, where it came from, the conditions it experienced along the way, and where it left the supply chain. Obviously, as an industry, we know some of this. Some of the time, possibly we know all of it, but I think, as we just heard, with difficulty, because the information must be sourced from multiple sources. So what's our challenge? I think the challenge is to find a better way to do this. And there's strong demand, and I must say I'm really heartened by everybody that went before me who have said it far more eloquently than I can. But from my perspective, there's demand for information from a range of stakeholders for a range of reasons. And I think that is kind of the interesting thing, is that there are so many people interested in knowing about the journey that our food's been on, or in fact any product, but particularly our food. And it's from different perspectives. It's regulatory oversight. It's we want to drive a price premium by saying that brie came from King Island. We want supply chain efficiencies for ourselves and our partners in the supply chain. We want to be able to have data so that we can resolve problems. So why is it important for our business? Well, I don't know that it ever was sufficient to just deliver the freight. I suspect one always had to deliver information about how things are going. That's just more important these days. Things have ramped up, and the more the information is real time, it seems to be the better. At a very high level, our customers just want to know that we picked up on time, made the delivery on time and in full, and that the goods were handled correctly. And I should say that most deliveries go well, but not all. And the classic need for customers is to be informed when there's a problem or delay. Were those goods, did they experience a temperature excursion, or is something going to be late because there's floods in New South Wales? That's important, because if it's going to be late, then our customers can tell their customers, and so on down the chain, and actions can be taken to manage a problem, I guess. The more transparent we can be, the more helpful it is. I suppose the other thing about why it's important for our business, and I think everybody's business that's been on the call, is we're in this world where there's just more data, and there's going to, and my view is that there's going to be a lot more data. There are new devices. We can put Bluetooth devices. We can put all sorts of IoT devices on all sorts of packages. We can possibly package down to the individual food item. The vehicles have telematics that spit out gigabytes of information, so we know exactly what's happening with them. And there are new communication protocols that have been invented that enable those devices to produce their data. We're going to need to find a way to manage those increased volumes of data. What can companies expect from the guide? Well, the guide's a really good guide, and it can provide a view on what should be done. And I think companies will select parts of the guides to implement depending on their needs. I don't think anyone's going to wake up tomorrow and go, I'm going to do the lot. But over time, I think we'll see the industry grow into these standards, and that will be a good thing. An example that's underway now that some people might be interested in is that there's a move to centralise or create a central registry of locations in Australia. Toll's part of that working group, so some other people, other organisations on this call, and some of us think it's a good idea to have a one central, one source of truth for location information, because it will relieve work, remove ambiguities of dealing with information. When you say you want something picked up or dropped off at this spot, the location becomes unambiguous. So that is, if you like, one of the first examples of, it's not written in the guide, but the guide makes a lot of use of GLNs, and they will come to national significance, I think. And so, we're kind of off and running already. How will it help businesses to achieve greater visibility? Well, companies already share data. We do it through APIs, and we do it in a bespoke way. So an example of that might be in our vaccine distribution, where we have several parties that do the final mile of refrigerated deliveries, and we're able to access their individual APIs and draw the data back to create a universal picture of how our vaccine deliveries are going in a particular region. Well, the guide calls for standards, and it's likely that in the future those APIs will pass back GS1 identifiers, and that'll make it easier for us to produce those visibility tools that we need. Just in summary, I just think we're in an incredible time in the world. I think there's going to be a lot more data created and readily available. And I think, as we've heard, and everybody said it a lot better than me, perhaps because you're closer to it, is that there are this multitude of stakeholders for a multitude of reasons who want to access this data. And there will be reasons that people haven't invented yet. There'll be uses for this data that people haven't invented yet. So it's important to get it standardized. And I think the standards will just let us have a more efficient and effective process. So I commend the guide to you, and I think it's a great source of information and instruction. And
Thank
that's it for me.
Thank you very much, Peter. Thank you very much indeed, and for all you've done toward as well, develop it. It's now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Greg Picker. Dr. Greg Picker is the Executive Director of the Australian Food Cold Chain Council Refrigerants Australia, Australia's first advocacy group devoted to improving compliance and standards in the handling of food at all levels of the cold chain. Greg will discuss the traceability issues from the perspective of freight transport, storage and distribution. And also Greg has been involved with us on the long trip to this day. So welcome to you, Greg. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Hermione. Let's hope this all works well for me. Can you see the slides okay?
Sure can.
Great, brilliant. First, let me say congratulations to the Supply Chain Center at Deakin. Congratulations, Hermione. Congratulations to the lab and the team. I think there's no doubt from what we've heard today that from a variety of perspectives, food traceability is absolutely essential. From our perspective, food traceability is one of the cornerstones to addressing some of the problems we see in food traceability. And can I say, I think you've done really well in setting up the timing of this, because Alistair just a few minutes ago talked about in passing, but I think he was absolutely right to do that. There are issues in the supply chain that we do need to address, and I'll go into a little detail on that. But Peter just then talked about the fact that we do have some of the solutions, and I think the guide and the work to further develop food traceability is going to be one of the central pieces to addressing the problems with the solutions that Peter's talking to. So we're quite excited about the potential this offers, and again, congratulations. To begin with, let me be clear, we do have a problem. One of the challenges, I think, for anyone that works in the cold chain and who tries to take a particular perspective on food loss and waste, but in the cold chain, is a lack of data. We know there are problems, and anecdotally, anyone who operates in the space is always hearing stories about what's happening, why it's happening, but there's a series of issues about that information being shared, as anyone who works in the area knows, and compiling that data is a particular challenge. We've been very fortunate that the expert group did a study with Refrigerants Australia, the Department of Agriculture, Water and Environment. It was released in 2019, that really presented some of the headline findings about what some of the losses in the food cold chain were. And I think this is worth just bearing in mind that we're talking about significant economic costs, significant environmental costs and social costs that result from this. These are big numbers and they're real numbers. And I should also point out that these estimates that are provided here, and I'm not going to go through them, you can read the screen, everybody, they don't consider the impacts of what subpar conditions along the way might also reduce shelf life in the future. So we know there's a problem, and it's something we need to address. What do we need to do about it? Thankfully, the report goes on, and I'll tie this back to food traceability specifically in just a second. But first, just going through this really quickly. What do we need? We need to better manage food between mobile and stationary refrigeration. Those critical control points that a number of people have mentioned are pivotally important, that we're better at managing those as we further develop our capacities. We need to better handle the food throughout the cold chain. This is just good common sense practice. One of the findings of the report is that somewhere around 60% or more of food losses is a direct result of poor food handling, of people not following the basic steps that they can do. Obviously, tracking food and sharing data throughout the cold chain, and I'll come back to this in more specificity in just a second, is absolutely essential. We need to be able to monitor food in real time, and to manage this better. And actually expanding and improving the operations of the cold chain, lastly, also can bring real benefits in reducing the amount of waste that we see. We're dealing with perishable products. Perishable products represent particular challenges. Peter just talked about vaccines. They're really, most of the products that we move around the country and around the world aren't perishable. Those that are represent particular challenges, and we're just, I think, have the capacity to get much better in how we manage those going forward. So what can the traceability community do? What can you do? I guess I'm presenting this as a bit of a challenge. What comes next? It's great that we have a traceability guide. We have to use it. We have to get out, we have to see where it's available, and we have to build on it. And I think building it on it is absolutely essential. And I'm going to actually ask for two things that people consider as we go forward about where we can build on it. The first is we need not only tracing, but we need monitoring, and it needs to be real-time monitoring. We need to not only be able to trace food as it moves from the farm gate through the truck to the DC, to another truck, to the retailer, to the export market, wherever it might be. We need to know how it's doing at a particular moment in time. And we need to couple that with the capacity to respond when things go wrong. It's great if we can trace food. It's a whole lot better if we can solve problems as they emerge. Secondly, and it was great to hear Peter talk about his perspective that parties are increasingly share information as food, and he was talking, I think, specifically about vaccines, as they move from owner and whether it be truck to warehouse, wherever it might be. That's great, but that, as we know who deal in this industry, sadly is not universal by any stretch of the imagination. Data, tracing data, ongoing monitoring is only good if we have a commitment that as items move through the supply chain, that the information is moved at the same time in a way that's shared by everyone. So we can do appropriate fault identification and respond as when things go wrong. Things will go wrong. It's a complicated process. It's about how we develop a system to better manage it. Tracing is a great step that's going to help us do that, and it's something that we can build on going forward. That's the message that I just wanted to leave you with today. Thanks very much, Hermione, and again, congratulations. Well done.
Thank you very much, Greg. Much appreciated. Thank you. I'm now going to the final speaker that I'm going to introduce before we go to the question and answer session with the panelists is Mr. Francesco Oliveri. Francesco is head of ICT at Perfection Fresh Australia. His experience is an experienced technology executive with a long history of working in the fresh produce industry, contributing at all levels with increasing levels of domain knowledge around ag tech and traceability. Francesco is also a long-term member of the lab and a great supporter of what we've been doing, which we appreciate. He will talk about the traceability issues from the perspective of the grower supplier. Up to you, Francesco.
Thank you, Hermione. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to acknowledge the great work that the Deakin Food Traceability Lab, together with GS1 and the other partners, have done so far with this guide. This is a journey, and this guide is a fundamental piece to improve Australia's food supply chain. So, who is Perfection Fresh Australia? We're a fresh produce business that from 1978 has evolved from being a wholesaler at the Sydney market to be the largest privately owned grower marketer and processor in Australia, employing over 1,000 people in Australia, Asia, and Europe. Our scale and reach means that we can supply produce to most markets within Australia and beyond. And our mission is to inspire a healthier world by connecting people to sustainable fresh food. We operate in many categories. You can find our product in all the retailers around the country or your next flight, wherever they will become the norm again. If the brand doesn't ring a bell, then I'm sure you'll be familiar with some of the product in this image. So why is traceability important for us? For our business, traceability is important to ensure food safety and export market access. When it comes to growing fresh produce, we strive for perfection. Every product to leave the farm gate must be fresh, edible, and farmed using global food safety standards. Our Perfection Fresh approved supply program and supplier audit ensures all our growers are certified. This means carefully managing soil, water, chemicals, and microbial conditions, as well as keeping a close eye on texture, color, and flavor quality. So for the ability to trace our product while in our care has been paramount to ensure our customers are confident of where the product has been along the supply chain. This is particularly relevant in export markets where regulation is in place requiring traceability from the origin at the farm block level. We now, together with the industry, need to go beyond the one up and one down approach. Perfection Fresh has a strong brand presence with exclusive and proprietary products like our Calypso mangoes, broccolini, and tubes. Provenance and authenticity is critical to promote and protect our brand and monitor consumer engagement. For example, we are currently embarking on a consumer engagement trial that will allow the consumer to find out where and when the raspberries were picked. It will also allow them to provide us with a feedback on the eating experience of the product. As you've seen in Tanya's presentation, our produce supply chain is complex. We move in excess of 27 million trays of produce every year, from over 500 farms to over 2,000 customers. In the last 12 months alone, this meant over 3.7 million journeys tracked for our produce from farm to our consumers. With such complexities, supply chain efficiency is then a driver to implement traceability across all the internal and external links in the chain to improve the ability to compete and remove waste. Being able to clearly record all the critical tracking events along the journey of the product, from the seed to the end consumer, is paramount to be able to make decisions based on data and not just gut feelings. To allow transparency across the entire supply chain, we need clear standards and willingness of all the participants to share enough information to facilitate this journey. In addition to cost-saving opportunities, these efficiencies improvements also make it possible to increase the rate at which food moves through the supply chain, as many people before me have said, reducing food waste and increase our supply chain ability to meet rising food demand and improve sustainability. But what are the challenges? And we heard already many challenges from the previous speakers, so I'll give you just a couple. On-farm data capture is still a manual process with different level of digitization. Even inside our organization and with our network, one size does not fit all, not even for the same product. The lack of consistent data and digital capability makes sharing information across the supply chain difficult. Technology development needs to bridge infrastructure gaps and deliver low-cost solutions. The wide introduction of IoT capabilities for real-time supply chain transparency and traceability will help speed up the digitization process and will save hours of processing while reducing human errors. Sensors can also be paired with other capabilities, like on-farm automation and smart equipment like new robots for crop forecasting and harvesting. Another challenge that we have is coordinating data across multiple disconnected systems without agreed standards. To give you an example, in our Calypso manual supply chain, we bring data in from over 20 separate systems, all talking a different language. A number of traceability pilots have launched in recent years. If this continues, traceability will likely emerge in pockets. If this is the case, traceability will not necessarily deliver a broad positive impact. This is why the Australian Guide for Implementing Food Traceability is a great step in the right direction. It gives a technology-agnostic framework to build upon recognized GS1 standards. Being the head of technology for the business, I can assure you that cybersecurity has always been extremely important in what we do. Historically, you only needed to protect your corporate system. Now, with the proliferation of IoT platforms, we need to make sure even these systems are designed for security from the ground up. You really don't want your tractor to be a backdoor for a malicious attack. You also want to make sure that every partner in the chain has a security posture that will not compromise your own. The guide can bring awareness by exposing the threats and providing a framework to follow for security assessment review. Thank you, and I look forward to work with all of you in the future to make our supply chain a bit more smarter.
Thank you very much, Francesco. Thank you indeed, and for all your help and support. It is now, we're going to hand over now to the question and answer sessions for today. We've concluded with the main speakers and the panelists, but these people who have been speaking are now the panelists who are available to answer your questions. As you know, you need to go down to the question session at the bottom, the question Q&A button, but it's not really a button, at the bottom of your screen, and please put your questions there. And Rose Elphick-Darling is going to be the person who will determine who on the panel is the best to answer and to address your questions. But before I hand over to Rose, I think it's terribly important to introduce Rose formally and properly. So Rose Elphick-Darling is the person who is the leader of the Food Traceability Laboratory at the Centre for Supply Chain Logistics. She is a person who has been amazing in the development of this guide over the last 2 years, maybe 3 years. Her energy and her determination has just been astonishing. And she's brilliant at traceability. She started in about 2004 in a previous job doing the first probable ever live fresh meat traceability test with Philadelphia and Burger King a long time ago, and in various jobs has continued this passion. So Rose has done a marvellous job. She leads the lab, Tony Bowles chair, and Rose is the lead from within our centre. And I think we owe her a great sense of gratitude. It is a gift to Australia. It's neutral, it's independent, it's creating the same language. And we have many people to thank, and I'll do that at the end. But I really want to emphasise Rose's incredible role in the development of this terribly important next step towards traceability. Rose, I will now hand over to you for the management of the people. Over to you.
Thank you, Hermione. I'll just go into the Q&As. Take a look. Oh, anonymous attendee would like to thank all the speakers. It would be great if we could further discuss during the Q&A within a supply chain among different chain actors who should be responsible to drive and cover at least the initial cost of developing a traceability system. I'm keen to hear about the data infrastructure costs, what platform or device is required or needed to implement a traceability system. Okay, well, I'll kick off on this one. We have done some analysis on the costs, particularly because of the concern about SMEs and their capability, where often the owner is the CIO and the COO and the CEO. So it's a real issue for smaller businesses and producers. We estimated that the cost is around $200,000 to undertake integrations with 5 other businesses. So the costs decrease over time, but we are looking at trying to strip out that cost from individual businesses by a data framework that is interoperable so that we avoid those heavy costs of integration. Now let's see who we've got who might want to comment on that. Francesco, I wonder if you might comment on that.
Yes, how many hours do we have to answer that question? It all depends. It all depends on what type of business you are, what capability you already have. And then, as I was saying in my presentation, in one of the slides, one of the big challenge and that also drives cost up is your capability already to digitize the process that you have. So if the data is already readily available and the industry provide a framework similar to the one contained in this guide, then the cost to access a traceability system would be low. If you still need to go through the process of having to digitize and collect information along your supply chain, then the cost will be higher. But obviously, it depends on the type of business that you have and how complex your supply chain is.
All right, we have another question from Cameron. Retailers are reliant on standards to help us provide capability across multiple supply chains. Are our suppliers already seeing different demands from their retailers? Question, perhaps Alistair or Tanya might be able to, or certainly Ram perhaps. Ram is actually sitting here physically beside me, so we'll just whoosh this laptop across to him.
This is so cool. Thanks, Rose. I'll just probably, for the benefit of everyone, I'll just read the question aloud again. The question from Cameron says, retailers are reliant on standard to help us provide capability across multiple supply chains. Are our suppliers already seeing different demands from their retailers? I think the question, I think we need to sort of look at it from a perspective of what is that we're trying to answer when it comes to traceability. We all know that traceability is a means to many ends. If you're talking about food safety issues and biosecurity issues and the standards and the importance of standards that apply in bringing that together, I think that's a very different way of looking at what is the data that we need to answer those specifics. And that sort of changes when it comes to answering other key questions. We're talking about quality of the product, what happens, how the product is handled in the supply chain, which is very different, completely different set of thing. And then that sort of varies again with sustainability. A number of producers are actually investing in key capabilities about the certification and the claims. So the kind of data that we need to be able to pull together that key messages, I think it's actually fair to say that we need to really focus on what are those key challenges that we're trying to answer. And if we are going to say that if it is all of it, then probably the standards should address all of it, because why do we need to have standards in the first place? And as a retailer and representing Woolworths here, we pretty much sell every product, every edible product here in Australia. It's not feasible for us to go and build solutions or develop solutions for each product category, let alone those individual products. So if not for standards, if not for interoperability, this is just not going to be practical enough to actually implement. Hope that sort of answers the question.
Thank you, Ran. We have a question from Melissa. Where is the guide available? Yes, Melissa, it's going to come up on a slide in a short while. There is a link and that will take you through to information about the guide, and you can have a look, and then you can go through and purchase the guide. We've put a charge on the guide, not because we want to make your life difficult, but we want to keep it up to date, and those funds are going to be dedicated to keeping it current. So in a short while, we'll move on to where you can get the guide. Other questions? The Q&A is empty. I'm distraught. You actually have half an hour, so I was expecting some more questions.
I'm not sure, Rose, but I can see other questions there.
We are attempting to. Here we go. Shen, really great programs, thank you. Would Deakin University be able to advise the next step of this guide? Would it seek endorsement by the Australian government and industry associations more formally towards mandatory implementation? Would you also know what the timeline of this is? I'm based in Singapore and believe this work is absolutely influential and inspiring to our business exporting into Australia. Yes, Shen, you know, I share the hope of a number of people who've been on this call that we can do this voluntarily and using whatever tools are at hand in terms of the technologies and the systems that are already at play. We certainly have no market failure in terms of solutions. Perhaps, Malcolm, you may wish to comment on this further.
Yeah, thanks, Rose. There is work happening at a whole of government level across Australia in relation to traceability, and that work is very familiar with the work that the centre is doing, and including the work with GS1. So I'm not in a position to make any sort of commitments or speak on behalf of other jurisdictions, but what I would say is that the voluntary approach suits provenance and brand protection quite well. It probably doesn't meet all the needs in relation to food safety and biosecurity. So as we know, there are in reality, the mainstream part of industry with its assurances in place, particularly those that supply to the big supermarkets, have got very good assurance and traceability systems in the main. There are lots of other supply chains that operate in Australia that go through other smaller outlets and farmers markets and a whole range of other things. And from a food safety and a biosecurity point of view, they are the areas that are probably of most concern from a government point of view. So there's a question there in terms of how we deal with that issue. My sense is that maybe there's an approach here, a phased approach with a voluntary start, that then once we've got it largely embedded in the guide, is providing all of those elements that we talked about in terms of interoperability and a range of other things, then there's the opportunity to onboard some of those smaller elements. In terms of the question of mandatory, we do have mandatory systems in place already in Australia for livestock, for example. But the question of then taking that over to the plant industries is something that's being considered, but there's absolutely no decisions being made at this point in time.
You did mention livestock, and one of our key sponsors for this program is Meat and Livestock Australia and the Integrity Systems Company, and they recognise the value of the guide in supplementing standards such as the NLIS requirements for livestock production. And indeed, quite soon we will be publishing the Red Meat and Livestock Guide, which is specific obviously to that product, with the support of the MLA. We have a question here from Professor Mark Lawrence. My name is Mark Lawrence, there you are, and I'm a nutrition professor at Deakin, conducting research in healthy and sustainable food systems. I'm also a member of the Food Standards Australia and New Zealand board. My question is, how do the panelists see those roles can engage with the guide to help promote healthy and sustainable food systems? All righty, Alistair, you've been quiet. Would you like to have a go at this one?
Sure, thanks, Hermione. And thanks for the question, Mark. How to approach this? There is a very high level of requirement for continuation and maintenance of food safety. Obviously, we've got existing standards, but those standards continue to change. They're influenced by legislation, case studies, court actions, and the like. So the closer that we can be with experts in the field and parties who can bring new cases forward, the better. The worst thing we can have, of course, is to miss a case, listeria or whatever. It would be disastrous for the industry. And we need to be on the forward foot, not waiting for others to bring it forward, but to find mechanisms by having that information supplied to us and have it and to be able to work on it in advance.
Thanks, Alistair. If you can mute, that's great. Yeah, I think that it's tremendous opportunity to move beyond labelling for consumers, Mark, and to be able to include information that's of value in terms of functional foods, ethical decisions that a consumer might make. The traceability program can certainly enhance that, particularly where you have something like a digital barcode on a product that can link back to the site of the manufacturer or the processor or the grower to be able to answer those questions for a consumer. That certainly enhances the current level of information, which tends to be largely limited to that label. Many of the solution providers that we're working with will use something like a QR code for enhanced product information, and that's a great opportunity for a range of information to be added for the consumer. Alistair has a comment to make. Alistair.
Thanks. Just one thing which came to mind. On web-enabled platforms, it is easier than apps. But importantly, some of the work being done by the Australian Food and Grocery Corporation with the digitisation of the nutrient information panel on food items is quite relevant to the question. To date, a lot of, they've just released a new format called V6, which is open to all suppliers of product, including ourselves. On that service delivery through, I think there's about 4 or 5 different companies, all of the information and standards required in all product ranges within business lines within one entity can be maintained in the cloud on a separate database. So that database will maintain all the specific information required under legislation to be added into and on ingredients and packaging. So if there's a change, and changes can happen quite rapidly, that database can be changed very quickly, and therefore the NIP, or the Nutrient Information Panel, can be changed a lot faster than what it has in the past. So if we find that there is an ingredient which has come from for instance, from offshore, which can no longer be maintained, that specification can be changed in a remote data set and automatically updated or regularly updated and made available to the company to use on the next production run which takes place. That may be a solution.
Thanks very much, Alistair, for that extra information. And with COVID and international sourcing being quite an issue, that's an extremely helpful way of getting that information quickly into the hands of consumers about changed ingredients. Any further questions? Oh, but wait, there's more. John, we're a tech company providing end-to-end transparency for small and medium-sized business. We are absolutely seeing demand for retailers globally, driven by provenance, handling, and human story behind each product. How can we participate in and be part of the solution? Well, luckily, John, I'm about to give you a bit of a lead on that with a couple of slides. So hold on to that one for a short while. And next we have a message from Karen saying, statement, wonderful work. Hope the system would enable the extraction of data to inform important statistics around production, sale, etc. And this is a very interesting point. Internationally, and certainly in Australia, the cost of farm surveys is escalating, and the number of participants are harder to encourage because their life is very data rich and they're constantly being asked to be participants in surveys and so on. I would imagine that there's a great opportunity around analytics, which might contribute to a better understanding about agri-food production. I'm trying to think who may be in a position here to comment on it other than Alistair. No, I think we might leave that one. Ben, I'm keen to understand from a retailer point of view if they see a need for improved traceability for the livestock sector. All righty. I think Ram again.
Back here we are. I think the traceability, the question about traceability comes in twofold. Whilst how far do we want to really go back in the supply chain actually is based on how much our customers are interested to know about the product. Genuinely, there is an increased interest in our customers trying to understand where the product has come from. In the case of a livestock situation, we're talking about cattle on the farm here, and then the significant transformation that happens as we actually push the trace of meat into stores and to the hands of customer. We definitely focus on where there is relevance from a customer's point of view. We actually go back and find those answers, no matter at what point in the supply chain, whether it's on the farm, leaving the farm, get into the abattoirs, leaving those processing plants, and all the way into our warehouses, to be able to give that level of relevant information to our customers and help them make those right purchasing decisions. And also articulate about the product quality in itself. We are fresh food people, so what it actually takes to enhance that brand image and working all the way back to the farm is definitely an important issue for us to tackle.
Thank you, Ram. Anonymous. Okay, we've got a few anonymous. Is there a list of traceability solution providers that we can access for each of the 12 traceability areas? Yes, indeed. The work with solution providers, GS1 is supporting. We have a link through. Now that link will allow you to search through registered traceability solution providers, and they come in all forms. They might be a solution provider for packaging and labelling. It may be a solution provider for on-farm systems. So everything from soil improvements, spray diaries, operations on farm, general management solutions there that you might wish to trace. You know, which actual vineyard, which row of broccoli or whatever it happens to be. So we have that link on the website. And if you go through to GS1, there is also a great document available that if you're wanting to put out an expression of interest in traceability, and if you're wanting to put out an RFQ into the marketplace for a solution, there are a set of questions and issues that you might want to consider related to traceability. So you can find a solution provider, you can get help with the traceability parameters of your RFQs, and if you're a solution provider, you can also go via our website over to GS1 to register your solution. Okay. Right, Laurent, how will you avoid the fragmentation of the market, especially with larger organisations who might have already adopted traceability frameworks in another part of the world? Now, this one, I think we shall ask Francesco to take up.
So that was more for you, Rose, to answer. That's a very challenging question. There is not there is not a solution right now. Well, what Laurent is saying in that question is that, and what we're discussing in the guide, is not a particular system. The guide will give you right now the fundamentals to be able to have standards to talk to different systems. The problem still be, as for the GLN repository, we will need to have a series of systems where all these systems will be able to talk to. And overseas, there already are systems being implemented, like the IBM Food Trace, that in America and in Europe, it's in use. And there are other systems also around the world that have been utilized to bring in all the information one place. But I don't think the guide or this laboratory scope is to decide on a particular solution provider in that sense. You might want to add to that, Rose.
Correct. It's about the data, not about the technology or the system. I think Ram wants to have a word, and then we're almost out of time.
Thanks, Rose. And I would like to build a bit more on what Francisco has mentioned. If I look at the word fragmentation posed in the question, and Laurent from IBM, I see it's actually the opposite. I see it's more of a collaboration rather than fragmentation. And why do I say that? I actually going to drop two acronyms here, so CTEs and the KDEs. And for those who are new today, which I'll be surprised if they are, CTE stands for the critical tracking events, and the KDE stands for the key data elements, which will help enable identify the different data points across the full supply chain. I think the world is moving towards adopting that as the base. Whether we're based in Australia, whether we're based in US, Europe, I think there is that collaboration happening at that global data standards we're talking about here, using CTEs and KDEs as the basis. So I see more of the world converging into this space with that model. And I strongly believe that the traceability guide, AGIFT, is a good demonstration of how we can actually adopt and implement those CTEs and KDEs.
Thank you, Ram. Just a couple of slides about next steps, how you might get involved, and where you can access the guide. Joe? Alrighty. Join the program. As I say, lots of opportunities to get involved in the program, certainly over these next couple of years as it develops into more product-specific guides and looks at these value streams for traceability that underpin your product claims. So they're the focus in upcoming activities with the industry demonstrations and additional product guides. You can get involved in these, sponsoring them, hosting them. We're developing e-learning modules that will allow that sort of online reference for everyone within industry. You may want to support those. If you're having industry events and seminars, we're happy to be there to support you about this. But certainly, this is a generic guide, and I think a lot of people are interested in a guide that's really specific for the circumstances of their particular product. Each has unique aspects. So we stand ready to support you with that. And perhaps it's something you might do through a peak body within your industry, as we're very keen to work with the peak bodies and their memberships. Joe? There you go. Food traceability, deakin.edu.au. You can just type in food traceability Deakin into Mr. Google, and it will take you through to this website where you can purchase the guide, and you can find out what's going on. Sponsorship and partnership opportunities are also detailed on the website, or you can just pick up the phone and ring me, and we'll take it from there. So grab your phones and take a photo of that, and we look forward to hearing from you. I'll just pass you back to Hermione. Thank you.
Thank you, Rose. And thank you everyone for the questions and the discussion. I'm going to close by saying some, I think, some fairly important things. The Food and Traceability Laboratory and the Centre for Supply Chain Logistics, the same thing, is keen to proactively develop Australia's future and improve future and supply chain competitiveness. And together we believe absolutely in partnerships. Neutral, independent partnerships, where together we collaborate and together we can achieve great things. And I think this is a fantastic example of that important partnership approach to supply chain and how do we improve our future and our country's future. The neutrality and the independence of it is one thing. The other thing is that it's been deliberately developed as a first fundamental step, how you get language right. Everyone knows what has to happen, but how do we actually implement? And that's been the focus of this guide and all of the work that we've done. You are very welcome to join us. Please reach out. We would be very pleased if that happened. I want to thank of course, the Centre for Supply Chain Logistics has a magnificent industry advisory board. Tony Boll is one of our members, and he heads up the Food Traceability Laboratory as its chair. Previously, Lynn O'Connell, DepSec Agriculture Australia, was the person who led the Food and Traceability Lab and started this process off, probably in this project off, in about 2017. We've been working hard at it ever since. We encourage partnership and we encourage the neutrality and working together. And we've deliberately developed this system because too often in Australia, people and across the world, people think technology is going to solve this. There's going to be one system that's going to solve it. And eventually there may well be. But at the moment, there are not. There's a plethora of it. But what we have to do is make sure we get the language right and the steps right, the processes right, end-to-end supply chain. So that's what we've been doing. I'd like to very much thank the Food Traceability Laboratory members. We have about 15, 20 people. Many of the speakers from today are members of the lab, and they have been stalwarts working with us for 3 years to get to this point of being able to generously share our knowledge. We're in a special place in a university. We should be generously sharing our knowledge, and that's what our centre and Deakin and our lab is all about. I'd like to thank very much the sponsors who have stood by this program for the last 3 or 4 years, to Woolworths, to Meat Livestock Australia, to the Integrity Systems Company, to people like Rama Keller, Irene Sabota, Marcel Sierra. The GS1 has supported this process. And of course, Deakin is a major sponsor as well. The speakers from today, Tony Boll, Rama Keller, Malcolm Letts, Tanya Chapman, Alistair McFarlane, Peter Carney, Greg Picker, and Francesco Oliveri. Thank you very, very much for your participation and your leadership in this area. We're really very grateful to your support. And then finally to Rose and the team. At the Centre for Supply Chain Logistics, we have a marvellous team, but Rose has led this program throughout. Rose, Ruben, Pat, Don, Jenny, this fabulous team, and Joe, of course, this fabulous team of people has worked tirelessly towards this product. So thank you, Rose, you're a star. Thank you very much, everyone who has participated. We're very grateful to your involvement, and we very much hope that people who are on the sessions today reach out and let's see what more we can achieve through partnership. Thank you very much, everyone. Bye then.